on South Park Commons. We're a community for technologists, thinkers, experimenters, a place for people. Hey Aaron, long time no see. A place for people to come and think about what they want to work on next. We want you to work on what you're passionate about, what you're interested in as it relates to technology. We don't really make a judgment on what impact means. So you can pretty much do anything. We have a lot of people here who pursued research after retraining for a few months, written books, and then gone on to join industry and then also started companies. So we are a community for the passionate, the slightly weird, the eccentric, and those that actually want to take some time and space from the noise that is Silicon Valley to figure out what you want to do next. So today we have Ries, who's very popular, as you can tell from the audience. We are over capacity in standing room only. Eric, would you like to join us?
Hi, everybody.
People must really, really like you and admire you. We've had all sorts of people here, everyone from Reid Hoffman to the mayor, and no one's gotten applause before they start jogging. So this is actually very impressive.
It's going to become a problem. Thank you. That's very kind.
So I'm gonna keep the introduction as brief as possible because he is actually pretty well known and you can find a ton of information on the internet. He wrote the book The Lean Startup, started the Lean Startup movement, and is now working on a long-term stock exchange which just actually received SEC approval. So congratulations on that.
Thank you very much.
Before we get started, I have a housekeeping announcement. An iPad will get passed around, and if you could fill in your name and your email address, that would be awesome. Okay, so let's get started. I wanted to start off with a question that would be immediately relevant to everyone here. So, you've done a lot, hence the applause. 2 companies, the 2 books, launching a stock exchange. I think the biggest question that is very pertinent to people here is what gave you the confidence to make those leaps and put yourself out there?
I know, right? Tell me about it. I'm not actually a very extroverted person. I just play one on TV. So first of all, hi everybody. Thank you for welcoming me. And thanks for having me here. I think it's been really cool to watch this grow and thrive, so congratulations to you. So I remember, so I became an entrepreneur just because it was the dot-com bubble and everybody was doing it. And I didn't really know at all what I was doing, and the results were predictably bad. So that to me at the time, it didn't feel like a leap of great confidence or whatever. It was just like I was a technologist and I wanted people to use my technology, and so having to go work at Microsoft and be the low man on the totem pole and work my way up, that didn't seem like a great path when I could just write software and release it on the internet immediately. And but I didn't see it in especially grandiose terms. And then that blew up and I was a total failure. So hi everybody, I'm a big failure. If you follow me, you too can be a big failure, huh? Who's with me? So yeah, it's not, the nice thing about becoming famous is that all the failures get edited out of your bio. So you no longer get introduced with anything bad. It's always all the good things you've done. But they're the minority, I assure you. Anyway, so I did that, it was a total mess. And in the movies, the most satisfying part of a movie about entrepreneurship is the scene towards the end where the plucky protagonist gets to go back and figure out whoever those people were who are that'll never work. And then you get to go back and be see, it did work, you were wrong, I was right, haha, you know what I'm talking about? So in real life, you get to call those people back and be actually you were right, and I have to go back to school now because that was a bad idea and I shouldn't have dropped out. So, right, so that's actually really unpleasant, not recommended as an experience. So I kind of thought that was I think that could have been the it for me in terms of entrepreneurship. It's such a bad experience, but I was applying for jobs in Silicon Valley after that, and people here had a totally different view of what had happened. My view was I had tried something, it failed, I was embarrassed, it was a calamity, and I had to kind of hide it from people. And the people here had this totally, and when I applied to jobs in Boston, that's all anyone wanted to talk to me about. Why did it fail? I remember one of my interview questions was, what could you have done different at the level of strategy, knowing what you know now to prevent the startup from failing. And I remember realizing in the moment that I didn't understand the question. I didn't know what the word strategy actually meant. So I didn't know how to answer. I was like, that's probably why it failed. I should probably learn something about that. But out here, no one asks me questions like that. Out here, people will be like, whoa, you had this really valuable learning on somebody else's dime? That's great. We don't have to pay you to learn all that stuff. Somebody else already paid you. And so people thought it was great that I had this failed startup. It was like a differentiator compared to the waves of other engineers they were considering hiring. So that was not my idea. Other people had that confidence for me. And then I remember later, I joined a startup, first startup I joined out here was like, I was employee 30 maybe, of a big, massive venture-backed startup that also failed. You get a sense of theme here. And at least that time it wasn't my fault. I was just kind of along for the ride. But it was kind of the same pattern, same story. It just was 2 orders of magnitude more expensive than what I had done in my dorm room. So the startup I did after that, I remember feeling like, okay, I just want to make some new mistakes. I just do the same thing over and over again. So obviously like the start of me kind of having this different idea about entrepreneurship came from there. But I can remember like my co-founders and I would fight about stuff constantly. And you've had co-founders, know what I'm talking about. And yeah, some people were like, no, not me, not my co-founder. We always love each other. And I remember there was a moment after we were like, in the early days it was fine to fight. Whatever, we had nothing to lose. We would just go at it all the time. There was no stakes. But as the company started to be successful, we had employees, we had investors. If there was all of a sudden something to lose, our fights got got really ramped up. And I remember being in a board meeting or some meeting somewhere where I was like, look, this is the right way to do this, and we're gonna, we gotta do it this way. And people were like, says who? I'm like, what do you mean says who? Like, well, what other successful companies are doing it that way? It was talking about continuous deployment or something. It was like crazy controversial at that time. And I'm like, I don't know, but like the fact that a big company is doing it, that's not an endorsement. We're a startup. We're doing everything new from them. And it was just like, it was a constant over and over again, like, well, says who? And I remember being like, you know what? Here's what I decided. I'm gonna go down swinging. Like, I'm gonna stand for what I stand for. And the people that I work with, this startup will probably fail like every other startup I've done. So like, what's really at risk here? But at least the people I work with, they're gonna know what I stand for. And if any day in the future someone's like, you know what? We need to hire someone who's like really customer centric and believes in fast iteration. They're like, hey, whatever happened to that guy that we fired? Because at least I'll stand for something specific. And like, if I get fired, so be it. I remember having that decision. Then it was like not about my ego and about whatever. It was not about confidence. I was just like, look, this happens to be what I believe. And I'll make the case for it. I'll talk, like I wasn't dogmatic about it, but I was like, I'll explain why I think it's good. And if you guys don't want to do it, that's cool. You can totally find someone else who wants to do it. And it kind of changed the tenor of our internal conversations. That became very important for me later because I got used to having to say what I really believed and defend it. And it helped me stop speaking out about stuff that I didn't know what I was talking about. I started to realize if I open my mouth to say something, I need to be able to defend it all the way to you should fire me over it, otherwise be quiet. So I think that was really the start for me. That kind of, when that starts to go well, it starts to get really addictive and start to want to do it more.
Thank you for that. So maybe if you could describe the lean startup methodology in your own words, that would be a great starting point to ask.
Sure, yeah. You guys have heard of the scientific method? It's worked out pretty well. It's better than astrology. So here's my idea. I don't want to be too radical for you guys, but right now, my idea is that when we build startups, we should not use astrology to build them. That's the lean startup, that's all it is. So there's this whole cult of personality around founders and about how founders can like change the fabric of reality through the power of their mind. You may have heard it. We don't actually have that power. It's not true. You can't make things happen in the future just by willing them. The superpowers that we attribute to founders have very specific causal mechanisms. They're real. Like, it does seem like they can do supernatural things, but it's not actually because they're supernatural. It's not like if you wear a black turtleneck, you can conjure special powers. Like, people get confused about what the cause and the effect is. A turtleneck is just a symptom of that person, not where the power resides. It's not like a crystal or something with energy in it. So if we're going to do entrepreneurship, we should make plans that are audacious and reality bending and incredible, but we should really ask ourselves what has to be true in order for this plan to work, and then treat those like hypotheses in the scientific sense, break them down into what we call leap of faith assumptions. Then instead of just building a product and hoping for the best, like I used to do in the startups, Instead, we build carefully designed experiments that are designed to give us high bang for buck in terms of how much we learn about the hypotheses per unit time. We call those minimum viable products, or MVPs, to remind ourselves that the experiments have to actually do something. It's not just like, science for its own sake in the laboratory. And then if it's not working, and this is always been the most controversial part of Lean Startup, but I think it's pretty straightforward. If it's not working, we should pivot to a new strategy that does work instead of persevering with a strategy that's not working. And like each of the things that I said, so that's, by the way, for people who are sick and tired about hearing about pivots but have never heard them formally defined, pivot is a change in strategy without a change in vision. And it sounds simple, like everything I've just said, I think sounds like now people are like, oh yeah, it's common sense, whatever, but like each of those specific steps like drives people crazy. And when you're in the trenches of entrepreneurship, they're actually very difficult to do because of course they each beg critically hard questions like, well, how do you know if the strategy is working or is not working? So how do we know if it's time to pivot or not? How do we know? Maybe it's always darkest before the dawn. I saw in that movie that right before it seemed like they were going to fail, that's when everything started turning around. So if you give up a day too early, that could be the end of your company. Anyone ever had this fight with their co-founders? So like statistically speaking, it's actually not darkest before the dawn. It's just going to continue to be dark. Like darkest before the dawn is actually like quite rare. But it does happen, so how do you know? So the framework of Lean Startup is simply designed to take this like very high level, simple schematic of science applied to entrepreneurship and then really get into the details of how you answer those questions in a rational way so that the co-founders don't kill each other. And so I certainly did not expect it would like take over the world and become this phenomenon when I started writing about it. To me, I was just trying to make sense of the experience that I had, and I couldn't understand why all the advice that I was given as an entrepreneur, it drove me absolutely crazy. I'd only get advice in two forms. One is like business school general management nonsense, where it's like, if you're running a big company, you should do this. I'd be like, but I ain't running a big company. So why, like, what does that have to do with me? It's like, well, you need to have departments. But I have 5 people. Like, there are 12 departments on the org chart. So how do I allocate the 12 departments among the 5 people? And like, why do we need departments? Like, you got to send ourselves an interagency memo to discuss the whatever? Like, no, 8 o'clock in the morning, the thing's on fire, and like, we're going to get it fixed by the end of the day or die trying. Like, that's not really covered in your MBA program. No offense to MBAs, many of my best friends are MBAs. But a lot of the business, like general wisdom, business, general management stuff that I was given made no sense to me. Or, you go talk to entrepreneurship people, it was all just so stories. You'd be like, I have this problem, I don't know what to do, and they'd be like, well, famous entrepreneur X once had a problem like that, and they solved it like this. It's like, well, that's great, but again, what does it have to do with me? Like, that person's a genius, I'm just me. But also, that was 20 years ago, and the world has changed, and they were in the semiconductor industry, and I'm in a different industry, and like, and then you start to look into those things, like, you know what, that sounds like a good story, I'm gonna go learn more about it. And then you're like, where did this story come from? Everyone knows this happened, but like, has it actually been documented by anybody? Like, everyone just knows, oh, Steve Jobs just did that. And you're like, he did? How do we know that he really did it? We don't have good evidence about it. Steve Jobs was extremely secretive. You think he really wanted everyone to know his secret process for how he made decisions? Like, no, he did not. Secondly, even if it is true, how do you know that it was the cause of his success? Maybe he succeeded in spite of that idiotic, weird habit he had, right? Like, people get so confused, like, he wore black turtlenecks and he yelled at people. And you're like, well, I should wear black turtlenecks and yell at people too. Like, well, maybe he succeeded in spite of that, not because of it, or maybe not. We don't really know. So again, like, is that really very useful advice? And then maybe what worked then doesn't work now. Maybe what worked in that industry doesn't work for him. And also, like, a lot of the Steve Jobs stories, Apple was already like a multi-billion-dollar company when he did it. So like, how is that helpful? Then you're like, well, should I go emulate what he did with the Apple One? Because that's a little different than what he did with the iPhone. So which Steve? It's just like this. All these just so stories. They're useful information, but they're not very good advice. And so I was just like, okay, one day, when people say like, says who, there'll be like one guy you can point to. He's like, well, says that random guy. He said you should do it differently. At least like people who think like me will have like one guy backing them up. That's all. I was like, all I was trying to do, and then like we're to turn into this thing. That's certainly not what I expected.
So I want to go back. I mean, I think we all understand the Lean Startup, and that was a beautiful explanation, by the way. But I think you just skimmed over this topic, which I think is pretty relevant to everybody here, which is how do you know it's time to pivot? Mm-hmm. Like, how do you define a metric of success where it's not like, engagement when it comes to consumer, it's not revenue when it comes to SaaS or enterprise. When you're in your first year of building a company, how do you know?
Yeah, like everyone forgets. Everyone here want hockey stick shaped growth? Yeah? Everyone pretty psyched for hockey stick growth? Okay, what makes something a hockey stick is the long, flat part. not the thing at the end. If you just have exponential growth from the first day, that ain't a hockey stick, okay? Actual real life entrepreneurship happens during the long flat part. I remember we had this business plan for one of the companies I built where we had this beautiful 5-year hockey stick or whatever. This amazing thing was supposed to happen once we launched, and we launched. And I remember it was like 6 months after the launch, and we were like, this plan is genius. See, in general management, if a plan predicts the future, if you said like, we said we're gonna do this and then something happens, you're like, this is a great plan. We're like, this plan says after 6 months, we're at almost no customers and almost no revenue. We were right on plan. Outstanding. The hockey stick is gonna happen any day now. It says in the plan, look, it's a great plan. And of course, we just stayed on the long flat part, forever. And we felt so betrayed. We're like, but the hockey stick never sticked. So how do you know? Like now, none of you are in this situation, but maybe you have a friend who's in this situation, and your friend's company raise some money, look good. The best part of being the most fun time as an entrepreneur is between raising money and launching the product for the first time. No customers to bother you. No pesky, no one argues with you. No trade-offs to be made. Just you and your co-founders arguing about technical crap. Love it. Okay, so maybe you've let that go on maybe a little bit longer than you should have, but okay, but you did launch eventually. Good job. Now it's been another 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. It's not a total failure. You got some customers. You got some revenue. You got whatever your metric is. You got your metrics engagement. You got some engagement. I meet those people all the time. They call me all the time, and they always want to ask me, do I need to pivot? I'm like, listen. First of all, you gotta understand. If you're calling me to ask me if you have time to call me to people are like, do I have product market fit? If you have time to call me to ask your product market fit, you don't have product market fit. People with product market fit don't have any time for anything because their whole life is consumed with keeping up with the monumental demand of the thing that happens. I know some people in this room have lived through this in their actual life. And if you've never seen this up close and personal, it is like one of the most terrifying and crazy experiences that anyone can ever have. So if it's not happening to you, you don't have product market fit. Good news. It's actually no need to call me or anyone else. It's very clear. The problem is that these concepts are not very helpful. We're asking you well, how close to product market fit am I? Maybe it's darkest before the dawn, and tomorrow it'll hockey stick. Maybe. So how is your friend supposed to know if they're just following some lunatic with the reality distortion field through nothing, or it's the real deal? It requires us to be very disciplined in actually saying, why is this thing supposed to hockey stick? What is the causal thing that will make it hockey stick? So for example, if I have a product that is super addictive, such that once you start using it, you cannot stop using it anymore. It's impossible. So you have 100% retention, day in, day out. You just can't stop. First hit's free, and then you can't stop. Such a product does not need a very high word-of-mouth growth rate to have exponential growth, right? Did everyone see that? If it grows just 5% naturally month over month, word of mouth, it'll be like having a bank account that pays you 5% interest compounded monthly, and you will be rich in no time. Everyone, right? So from the vanity metrics point of view, from a gross numbers point of view, you can't tell the difference between a company like that or a company that's could have been like that, except it has 95% retention. 95% sounds really good. But if you have 95% retention and 5% word of mouth growth, you will have no growth. You'll have flat line. And I often meet companies that have 60% growth, but 60% churn. And so the churn and, sorry, I did my math wrong. So I'm doing math live, it's always a bad idea. But if the churn is equally balanced by word of mouth, both numbers can be quite large and your number will be very flat. So it's very hard to tell where you are unless you can take an x-ray to say what are the underlying per customer metrics that are supposed to drive what we call the engine of growth to turn up, and then are we making progress against those? So if you say, look, we really believe it's an engagement-based business, and today we're at 40% retention, but for it to work it needs to be 95% retention, then okay, now we have a nice yardstick, and we can figure out if we're getting closer to the goal or not. Here's a dirty secret though for entrepreneurs. Pivoting is not hard, and knowing when to pivot is not hard. This is God's honest truth. The only thing that's hard about entrepreneurship is getting you and your co-founders to agree on the facts of what's actually going on right now. If everybody agrees on the facts, what to do is very obvious. I've never been in a situation where people do a pivot and they're like, God, I wish we had waited longer to pivot. Everyone's always like, why didn't we do this sooner? This is so dumb. Or there's usually in a situation where you have to pivot, there's some other idea that's percolating that's no one's willing to really say it out loud because no one wants to undermine the momentum of the main thing. But everyone's kind of this other thing seems like it's working. You imagine sitting around in the PayPal days and you're this PDA cryptography thing doesn't seem like it's really going anywhere, but sending money by email does seem to, and it's like, who wants to be the first one to be like, I think we should go all in on the other thing? Like, if you could agree on the facts, it's not that hard to do, and the ideas are usually already present. The hard part is we are not usually rigorous enough in measurement such that we can all agree whether the strategy is working or not, because many of us are not actually clear what a working strategy would even look like. We know what it would look like at the vanity metrics level of like it's an unbelievable success, but without that, we don't really know what success is. So most of the lean startup is actually not about figuring out when to pivot. It's actually just having the discipline to have everybody on the same page about what is happening right now. Is our current strategy actually taking us closer to our vision or not? You can answer that simple question in an unambiguous way, and then get 5 different people with 5 different life experiences to all answer it the same way. Everything else is much easier.
So normally as technologists and technical people, when people think of pivots, the first thing that comes to mind is I need to change my product.
Of course.
I need to change certain features in my product. If I made these changes,
you should have used
in my
React.
product,
That was the problem.
Yeah, we should have used
React.
some other piece
Or
of
if you did use React, then you shouldn't have used React. That's always the problem. Yeah.
Would you agree that a pivot doesn't necessarily always mean changing the fundamental product or the features that you build, but it could be changing how you approach custom acquisition or changing...
Oh yeah, it rarely does. I mean, first of all, it rarely does because most people are too stubborn. So people try everything else first. That's natural. And if you think about what are the elements of a startup strategy, again, not to be all theory, like we're kind of in the realm of theory here, but we can be more practical as we go. Like who's the customer? What is the go-to-market? What is the business model? How much do you charge? Just like, what does it say on your, people talk about like, how is it positioned for the value proposition, whatever. It's like, what does it say on your website the product is for? I once built a product that we built for stay-at-home moms, and the product, didn't say like, hi, product for stay-at-home moms. Like, it was just like, it was positioned a certain way. It's just the language was a certain way, and yet the people that actually used it were teenagers. And this was a calamity for the business plan, because stay-at-home moms, we had picked them because they had discretionary income, and teenagers did not. So we could never make any money because all these teenagers. I remember it was a communications product, so we would use the product to interview customers, and I remember like, we would literally like randomly choose someone who was online to chat with, to talk to them about the product, and be like, another teenager. I'm like, you guys are clogging up my channel of communication. I'm trying to talk to my target customer. Like, get out of here, what are you doing? So like, at some point, we had to face facts, like, okay, we missed the mark on who the target customer was. So we had 2 choices. Should we like abandon this product and build a new product for stay-at-home moms? Or should we just change the website and like lean into the fact that we have all these teenagers and use them? And it was like, well, there's not a right answer to that question, by the way. Both would have been completely valid choices. Like I work with a lot of entrepreneurs where like they're a social mission driven company, and like I remember the company was like creating technology to help deaf people hear better. But it turned out that like audiophiles love the technology because it makes listening to vinyl records way more fun. It's like, well, you want to be a vinyl record accessory, or did you get into this to help people who are hearing impaired? There's not a right answer to that question. You could easily make an argument for either case, but they had really clear values and they made the choice that they made. No right answer. So that's what's so frustrating about this, is there's a lot of elements to a startup strategy, and you don't get partial credit. You either get 10 out of 10 right or you die. Isn't it great? As an entrepreneurship awesome. It's like, and of course, and if you don't die, all you get to do is level up to the next big boss, where the big boss of the previous level is now the Goombas in the new level. So just everything just gets exponentially harder, and you want to kill yourself more and more. That's your reward. But at least you got to stay alive. If you just get one little thing wrong, you're kaput. So that sounds like an argument for perfectionism. People hear that like, oh, then I better not launch anything until I get everything right. But it's not an argument for perfectionism. It's an argument for getting to a perfect outcome. And the question where the debate in entrepreneurship is, what is the best mechanism by which to get to a perfect outcome? I would say testing and iteration and learning is better than sitting in the cave by yourself, like thinking grand thoughts, but other people feel differently.
So speaking of that, can you use this methodology even before you have a prototype or product? Like, does it always have to be related to
Sure, I'll demonstrate to you right now. In the lab on my way over here, I invented teleportation. Just FYI, isn't that awesome? Okay, who would rather teleport than walk to commute to work every day, right? Yeah, some people like to teleport. Teleportation is like the ultimate entrepreneurial product, because it's a product that literally every person on earth would rather have teleportation than whatever they use for transportation today, right? So like, now the dirty secret, of course, that every entrepreneur thinks their product is just as good as teleportation. Everybody always thinks that every person on earth will want to do it. But here's the great part about a delusional entrepreneur who believes their product is so great every person on earth will want to use it. It's extremely easy to create what we call a falsifiable hypothesis in the language of science for that. I can easily test this hypothesis to find out if it's right, and I'm going to do it right now live in front of all of you. If it's literally true that every person on earth will want teleportation, then it's also literally true that the first 10 people I choose at random will also want it. Okay, show of hands. Who would like to be the very first person to beta test my unproven teleportation device? Oh no! What happened? Everyone was going to want it. There, I just did it. The live demonstration right in front of all of you. I did not invent teleportation. But now I can tell you what the problem with teleportation is going to be, which is that no one's going to be first to be teleported because you get physically dematerialized. So you don't need to build a product to find that out. In fact, no matter what product you're building, every product you can do experiments before it's done, just by the following exercise. Once the product is done, how will people find out that it exists? And like I've worked with a lot of industrial products, like regulated healthcare devices, all kinds of products where like the answer to this question is, when it's done, we will hand the customer a brochure and ask them to buy it. And you're like, does the technology exist to print this brochure today? Sure. You're like, yeah, of course. Well, why don't we say that this product will be built soon and you can pre-order it right now? And then hand that to a customer and see what happens. Ta-da, we have a minimum viable product without having to build anything. Now, not everyone's like, well, in my industry you couldn't get away with that. In this situation you couldn't build this consumer app. Of course, there's always a specific technique that you got to figure out that makes sense for your customer, your situation. But in general, we as technologists way overestimate how much code and technical accomplishments are required before we can start testing the consumer, customer, commercial assumptions that underlie the plan.
Right. I mean, I'm totally on board with that, and I agree with it. And I try to tell people that, spend all your time validating your hypotheses, because you don't want to raise and then spend 4 years of a life working on something that's not going to work.
You really don't. Trust me, having done that, you really don't want to.
Yeah. So speaking of that, given the lean startup methodology and the new average seeds are around $3 million, I know that money is not a factor in the methodology, but I'm just kind of curious. I often find that entrepreneurs succeed better if there are more constraints.
Yeah.
What would your advice be for someone who's raising a seed round?
Well, so just like putting my industry observer person hat on, there's an obvious U-shaped curve of how much money you raise at the beginning to success. Too little money and it's not good. You start to raise money and it's good, and then you have too much money and it's like, you guys read those TechCrunch announcements for blah 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 company just raised $50 million seed round. You're just like, well, they're dead. You just know, they're dead. They're 100% dead. You just know it. They're definitely dead. And of course, there's occasionally an exception, but the vast majority of those companies, I will not name any names. You guys can shout them out if you want. I'm not naming any names, but you're just they're dead. It's just too much money. There's no way. Nobody can spend that amount of money in a successful. It's just impossible, and it just messes with you in a terrible way. Now, as an entrepreneur, that cuts against the advice as an entrepreneur. You basically always raise as much money as you possibly can, because you never know if you're going to need it. And the way to reconcile those two things is, it's not raising the money that's the problem. It's the effect that it has on your decision making. So if you can build a disciplined process to spend the money in an intelligent way, then you should use that process, no matter whether you raise a lot of money or a little money. And it's funny because now we're in flush time, but I started writing about lean startup just about 10 years ago during the financial crisis. So it just had this massive boom, just like this one, and it was collapsing in front of us, and it was a great time to be known as a lean startup guy, because people were constantly calling me my investors told me I got to cut costs. Can you help me get out of my lease? And I'm like, no, I'm trying to talk to the build, measure, learn feedback loop and whatever. I got this extra office furniture. I heard you know what to do with it. Nope. But I can help you learn how to pivot to whatever. And you imagine these conversations really did not go that well. But my point was look, I have a theory. My theory is, we didn't talk about this so far, but the build, measure, learn feedback loop. How much time elapses between when you have an idea and you've validated whether that idea is brilliant or crazy? Anything you can do to collapse that time down is value-added activity. So any money you spend in pursuit of faster validation is good money spent. Anything else you spend money on is waste. So having a fancier office, does it help you get the validation sooner? Well, it kind of depends. Who are you bringing by that office? Oh, well, I'm in a business where I have to have fancy clients come by my office and I actually have to convince them that the product is real, which they can tell by the marble in my whatever. Okay, great use of proceeds. What, you're building an app, your customers will never see your office in their life? Maybe not. So there's no universal right practice. It's just whatever can shrink that time down. So my claim was, if you have wasteful spending, why are you waiting for a financial crisis to cut it out? If we have a diagnostic for eliminating waste, we should do it all the time, in good times and bad times. And of course, people are like, yeah, thanks for telling me now. That's not that helpful. But now it's funny, now I get the reverse. Now people are like, oh, we don't need lean startup anymore because we have all this money. It's like, well, yeah, if it never crashes, I'm sure it'll be fine. You know, this will be the first financial boom without a following crash. That'll be great. Or like, if you don't believe that, if you're like, well, no, everyone is like, well, we know it's going to crash. There's like, you believe you can time the market? Really? If you can time the market, why are you building a company? Just go profit by your unbelievable ability to arbitrage this private knowledge. So if you believe the market will crash eventually, and you don't believe you can time the market, then if you build a plan such that you're raising money today and you have to raise money at some other date, and the only thing you'll have to show between now and then is no validation of any kind, but just you'll have like built a product and launch it and then you'll raise more money then you've built a plan that says, I know for sure the market will not crash between this date and that date. How could anyone have that kind of confidence? That seems crazy to me. So don't do that.
Yep. Okay. So I just wanted to open the floor up for any audience questions as it relates to lean startup, because then I want to move on to a completely different topic. So let's just have contextual questions right now. Anybody? Yep.
Yeah. Hey.
Thanks for the talk, Eric. So actually, maybe I'll stand up. So this thing you talked about, as far as like trying to come up with some scientific method, right,
yeah,
in which the founders or people who work in a company can come up with, something like semi-objective or pseudo-objective. It's funny because that's also been my experience. Is that there's all this folk knowledge out there, and this personality around like this founder did this, this founder did that, and I've actually also seen that, like you talk about how pivoting was warped to something that originally didn't mean. Yeah. And I've seen also your own words be warped, like this concept of iteration has also been warped.
Yeah, people pivot 4 times a day.
Yeah, or even something more like a lot more sinister. So for example, it may make sense to iterate, for example, when you're building, let's say, a web app or some application, something like that, right?
Yeah.
But that concept doesn't really work on, say, frontier tech. Right? Where you have a scientific process to follow. So I came from self-driving, where you always hear this thing of, let's iterate on this algorithm.
Yeah.
It's like, no, it's not. Let's actually design it, because we know how this thing works, right? Or this architecture.
Yeah.
So I've also kind of like seen that as well. So I didn't really have so much of a question as much as maybe just wanted to share that.
Yeah, no, thank you.
It's
I'll turn it into a question.
All right.
What are some areas where the lean startup methodology, as it relates to tech, does not apply?
I used to have a laundry list of these, where I would be like, if you're doing rocket science, curing cancer, blah, 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 then don't use lean startup for that. And I've stopped doing it because in everything I ever had on my list, eventually someone comes to me and they're like, I actually found a way to use lean startup even when we're curing cancer. I'm like, well, great. Let me just cross that one off the list. And this is a current, I won't name the company because they're stealth, but they figured out a way to dramatically reduce the time between when they conceive of a scientific way to do their diagnostic thing, which I won't say what it is, and how fast they can get that through the various kinds of trials. So they're able to dramatically improve the feedback loop for learning about whether the scientific thing works, so they can test more theories per unit time, so they're getting to the thing they want to get to much faster. And for them, that's what a minimum viable product looks like. Same with rocket ships, and just people working on the craziest stuff. And generally speaking, so the theory answer to your question is, generally speaking, in order to use lean startup successfully, you need a combination of a high level of uncertainty of whether the thing will work or not, so and in particular commercial uncertainty. So some kind of uncertainty is just can you build a teleportation device or not? There's not really much you can do about that other than just do the science in the lab. But generally speaking, most products we build, there's at least some level of adoption or go-to-market or growth uncertainty that also is important. And so if you have that, the more of that you have, the more lean startup will be helpful. And you have to have an underlying cycle time advantage over whatever the incumbents have done in the past. So generally speaking, if you can iterate faster than the incumbents, you have an advantage if you can translate that into more learning about those uncertainties. So that kind of 2x2 matrix, that's the sweet spot. And the thing that is cool is people treat cycle time like it's an immutable fact of automotive or manufacturing, but actually cycle time is a choice. We make choices about the development paradigm that we're going to go to market with. And if we choose better development tools and have a faster cycle time, then we can sometimes make things possible to do with lean startup that previously would have been considered not possible. That's the more formal definition. And when people are in the lab building amazing research, I can't tell you how often. I mean, if you guys want some stories, I'll tell you stories. But like the general pattern of like researchers spending years of their lives and crazy money building some piece of research based on a set of specifications. The research is ready, but it has this level of efficiency, this level of performance, this level of whatever. And if you interrogate, like, where do those standards come from? They're like, that's what the consumer demands. You're like, how do you know? They're like, beep, boop, beep, boop. I don't know. I'm just in my lab coat. Someone told me. Who told you? Somebody who knows. Who knows? Like, self-driving. How can anyone know what the performance characteristics have to be? Like, maybe now, but like in the early days, there were no commercial products, so no one had any idea what the state. Like, and I've seen lots of situations where the technology is being way over-engineered for one technical performance characteristic that customers don't care about, and way under-engineered for something that they do care about. And so we have to at least do a little bit of lean startup to figure out how to get those things into proper alignment. That's your question? Not your non-question?
Oh, no, I was just saying it was very refreshing to hear that, essentially, because like this warping happens. And
it's great. I mean, you put anything out into the world, that's eventually what happens.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
What's the most common misinterpretation, or like the biggest like bastardization of lean startup that you see frequently?
All the time. Oh, now, I mean, this is ridiculous. The most common ones are lean means cheap. I still get it, even to this day. People were like, I mean, someone wrote an article today. It was like, now that people can raise so much money, no need lean startup anymore. I'm like, okay, man. Good luck with that. And then some people still think that lean means no vision. So it's just iterate, throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks, and then just whatever sticks, like do more of that. Like anyone who's actually done that, like you will be building like porn or like astrology, like, you know, crap. Like it leads you in very bad directions because you're like, anything people will click on, well, okay, I guess we have to do that. So don't do that. A more subtle one is, I mean, by the way, like I try to address that misconception like way up front, right in the book. Like part 1 of the book is called Vision. Like this exact thing is addressed like in the introduction on like page 19. I still get it. I'm like, did you even read the book? I don't get this as much anymore. People used to think I was really anti-VC because of the cheap things. Be like, you're saying people should only bootstrap or whatever. And then some people are like, lean startups are only for software, only for dating apps, only for, you know, it's only for this, it's not for that. And, you know, I understand that. That's my background, so that's more of a fair misconception. But I think at this point we now have like just so much of a library of examples that are being used elsewhere that I don't hear that quite as often as I used to. Those are the most common.
Okay, last question before we move on.
In terms of learning iteration feedback loop, is there anything from the book that you would that you wish you had put in that you've learned since?
The book came out in 2011. That's like an eternity ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I wish I had done differently. I mean, the book itself was very well tested, and you know, I did a lot of workshopping and beta testing and MVP chapters and all. I mean, it was really it would not have been as successful, I don't think, if we hadn't done that process. But it was extremely well calibrated to people's level of understanding at that time. And of course, now the world is different. So some things are just, you know, some of the examples are dated now. Some of the advice is now either considered really obvious. People are, I mean, I get reviews now from like, you know, especially like kids coming out of Stanford or whatever. They're like, I can't believe anyone had to write this down. It's so obvious. And then they're like, what? This was written in 2011? I thought it was written in like 1980. And I'm like, oh man, am I old now? So, you know, I get a lot of people like, you're so young. I thought you would be much older. It's great. So there's that part is funny. I think the biggest thing is there's many places in the book where I just kind of like in passing mentioned that you should do something that now I'm like, oh, I should have written a whole book just about that. So like one of my current topics that I'm very interested in is what happens to companies as they scale. So how do you go from being the entrepreneur that is in charge of everything and you're the one with all the creative ideas to now you manage a portfolio of entrepreneurs who work for you? Entrepreneurs are not exactly the easiest people to manage, you might have noticed. Many people become entrepreneurs because they hate big companies, they don't want to work in a big company, and then it's like, well, if you hate big companies so much, why are you trying to create a new one? And then they're like, well, but my big company will be really different. And you're like, but how? Like, by what mechanism? Like, through the power of your mind and your great intentions? Like, you know, I've seen a lot of people go with great intentions, have not great outcomes. So there's a couple places in the book where I'm like, oh, if you ever find yourself in this situation, what you really need to do is create internal startups, and they should have scarce but secure resources. Here's a paragraph. They should have a stake in the outcome. Here's a paragraph. I don't remember what the third thing was. And anyway, blah, blah, blah. Moving on, you should like, now I'm like, oh man, I have like really dramatically oversold how easy this is going to be. Like, oh yeah, just do those 3 things. As if I was like, you can make a software startup, no problem. Like, just write some code, raise some money, and hire some people. Good, now you know everything you need to know. It's just like, there's a lot of places where I wish I had been a little more, filled in those details a little bit more, although probably then people would have found it really boring and would have damaged the book. So maybe that's just the nature of the beast.
Your last question. Before we
I was going to ask you, one of the most amusing things I find is how to give VC funds the same advice that you give companies. So I'm curious, what kind of lean startup advice would you give to
venture funds?
To venture funds?
Dude. A lot of my best friends are VCs, okay?
I say the same thing, but I never invite them here.
You said it, not me. I know. I'm going to raise money as soon as we're done here. So when I first conceived Lean Startup, I actually thought the way to change the industry would be to change VCs. I actually spent 6 months behind the firewall at a venture firm. I was like, it's very straightforward. VCs have the money. Entrepreneurs do whatever the VCs say, so that's the place to change. And like, you can laugh now. That was very misguided theory of change for the world. Luckily, I gave it up quickly. So I've been trying to convince investors to change their behavior for a long time, to very little success. I think the nice thing about it is that there's like a Darwinian process of elimination. So VCs are getting better on average because like eventually they become insolvent, but they're not good at what they do. So like that, it's just a very slow process. I wish it would happen a little faster, but that's where it is. I would say the key things are like, this is like, I remember telling people that like, if you're a VC, the entrepreneur's your customer. So understand the customer, treat them with respect, like try to create value for them. That was like, now that's like become like a mantra of VCs, but like that's very new. That's a very new idea. That was not at all. And then I remember telling people that everyone's like blah, 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 well, Silicon Valley's a meritocracy. It's like, okay, well, if you actually want to be a meritocracy, first thing you need to do is start to develop metrics for whether people are worthy of investment or not. And then you have to be able to score whether they're worthy of additional investment or not. You're gonna have to start to be more objective about that, not just, and that is like, even still, such a controversial idea. I remember I was sitting with one of the top VCs in the Valley, having this fight, this is 5 years ago or more now. And I was like trying to be like, look, if we could get a scientific process and we get better resource allocation, we'd have less bias and all the benefits we'd have. And as far as I could get him to agree in the course of an hour of like straight argumentation, it's like, well, if that was true, that would be really valuable. I was like, so therefore, he's like, nothing. End of meeting, thanks for coming in. So no, I don't think not only have we not pushed the limits of what's possible in the venture asset class, I think we're only scratched the surface. There's a lot more that can be done. And luckily we have an explosion of new managers from more diverse backgrounds. Like I hope that will lead to a lot more experimentation and eventually us coming up with better models, but not yet.
All right, great. Let's move on to LTSE. For those who don't know, it's the long-term stock exchange that just got approved by the SEC, which actually Eric is going to go raise funding for right after this talk.
With any luck.
So I know you started this movement 9 years ago. What was your vision behind it?
It was one of these really simple things. If anybody actually read the Lean Startup all the way to the last page, which I understand nobody did, but if you actually did, one of the very last things I said in the Lean Startup is that somebody should really fix this problem of short-term capital markets, because if you want to do Lean Startup, it only works to whoever's asking for over-iteration. Lean Startup only makes sense if you have a philosophy of long-term thinking behind it. Like the only reason to experiment and learn is if you're going to be around to take advantage of that learning and do the next thing and the next thing. So people are like, I'm just going to put my toe in the water and see what happens. Like, Lean Startup's not going to help you. People who just want to do something small, you don't need Lean Startup for that. You don't need minimum viable product. You're just making a minimum product. So just go make it and be done with it. Like you don't need all this fancy theory. We need this fancy theory in order to sustain a long-term vision over a long period of time in the face of the monumental number of setbacks that we're all going to experience in your friend's company. He's going to experience, she's going to experience as they go forward. So how do I reconcile that fact with the fact that I'm also telling people to create venture-backed companies and take them public into the most short-term governance environment that exists on planet Earth? And I didn't know how to reconcile that. I was like, I don't know what to do about these two things, but I just said in the book, somebody should really fix that problem. And I sketched out how it should happen. There should be a long-term stock exchange, and we should get investors who really believe in long-term philosophy to invest in companies who have that same philosophy, and they should work together, because companies that are governed that way will be worth more money. Everyone's always, you ask people like, why are companies so short-term focused? Like, any of you worked in a public company? Like lived like quarter to quarter, beat and raise, that whole nonsense? Like, why? Yeah, a few of you have done it. Why is it that way? Everyone's like, well, Wall Street, just that's what investors want. You're like, investors want you to lose money? Because like if companies are distracted from serving customers, that's their fundamental purpose. They're not as valuable. So that can't be right. Investors can't possibly want that. And then of course, if you really like, as you learn more about how capital markets work, you realize that like the signals that employees and managers and boards of companies are receiving about Wall Street are being filtered through a lot of middlemen who have different incentives than the people who actually hold the underlying capital. So my idea was like, why don't we create a partnership between the really long-term investors and the really great companies, and we can have more Toyotas, more Jeff Bezoses, more long-term companies. You don't have to be a total lunatic like those guys to make it happen. Even normal companies could be governed that way. That was the original vision. I wrote that in 2010. Can you believe it?
So how will the rulebook differ? And I know you can't tell us everything, but maybe one or two examples, like how is it going to be different from the NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange?
Yeah, so this is a highly regulated business. I think as regulated as you can be. So what I can say is very limited. So rather than tell you what the rules will be, because the rules will still have to be approved by the SEC and I don't know what they're going to do, I can tell you some of the principles by which from which the ideas that we will share with them will be derived. Everyone understand what I'm saying? So yeah, I tell you what the rules will be. Anybody? No, I did not. I don't know what the rules will be because they haven't been approved by any regulators yet. But I can tell you some of the principles that will help us derive the ideas that we will share with the regulators over time. Everyone understand?
Yep.
Did I solicit anybody to list on my exchange?
Nope.
No, I did not. I just shared with you the principles. Okay. So for example, today, when you are a private company, you know every single person on your cap table, unless you're really incompetent. And you agonize over who you're going to allow to become an investor in your company because everyone knows having smart money on your cap table is a source of competitive advantage. Yeah? Most public companies are run without knowledge of who the investors are or what they want. So like literally, public companies pay for a service that's called stock surveillance, where very clever algorithms try to scour the public market feeds and public filings or whatever to try to guess who your investors are. And from that guess, you can then try to guess what they want. It's actually illegal to talk to them, so you can't really ever find out. It's like just imagine trying to run a company and having any kind of coherent long-term strategy if you don't know who your long-term investors are and you don't know what they want. So at the level of a principle, I think it would be good if public companies knew who their long-term investors were and could be better engaged with them for mutual benefit, because your long-term investors are your most important partners. And not only should you, I think, be able to engage with them, I think you should be allowed to reward them for being your long-term partners. That should be something that you give them special privileges as a result. What exactly those privileges are and exactly how the mechanics should work, you should read my SEC filings right before bed to help you sleep to learn all about that.
It's really long.
They're really long.
Can someone put up a summary?
No, because I can't summarize it because my filings have to speak for themselves, and anyone else who tries to read the filings falls asleep before they get to the end, and it can't be summarized. So no, you're just going to have to we're going to have to wait for additional things to come out, and it will eventually become more clear. But like that's just, but people understand what I'm talking about. As a principle, we need to be able to know who the long-term investors are. You know, as a principle, companies, I think in this next generation of companies, there's an understanding that the way you serve shareholders best is by serving all of the company's stakeholders, starting with customers. Like in order for shareholders to make money, the company has to be designed to have some kind of purpose or mission that's related to helping customers. And that if you make money for shareholders at the expense of customers, at the expense of employees, at expense of the communities that you live in and serve, that in the long run, that's actually worse for your shareholders than if you were like maniacally focused on those things instead of shareholder value. Everyone understand what I'm saying? So we have to have governance rules that allow companies to develop metrics to, first of all, just measure their impact on the shareholders that matter, on the stakeholders that matter. Companies are hyper aware of like what's going on with the ticker, but it's very easy to inadvertently build a company that has really toxic effects for customers and for the environment and for the communities where your customers and partners live, and make money doing so, and then you wake up one day and you're like, what have I done? So we don't, none of us want that. We don't want to have that experience one day. I know that's not going to happen to you, but it happens to everybody who goes public eventually. So we don't want that to happen. So we need to have mechanisms for identifying those metrics, and then we have to have governance mechanisms that make those metrics as important as your financial metrics. Otherwise, people won't do them. So compensation's got to be tied to it. It's got to be related to board governance, and so we have to find ways, principles, that from which ideas can be derived, that can help companies be governed in this different way. So I could kind of, there's a bunch of stuff like that I could go on and on about, but those are the ideas under consideration, and our market rules hopefully will eventually reflect those principles.
And is the business model any different from the other exchanges?
At one level, no. I mean, we still sell services for money, but it is different in this very important way. Today, stock exchanges exist to serve traders. Stock trading dominates everything related to public markets. That's how everyone gets paid. Exchanges, bankers, sell side, everything's about stock trading. And we would like to be able to sit with customers, with companies and long-term investors and say, listen, just for once, you're the customer, not traders. I don't think against traders. Stock trading is a perfectly fine thing to exist. I don't no bad feelings about people who go into stock trading as a profession. It's just, stock traders are very well served by 1,000,000 trillion different institutions that already exist to profit by helping them. We'd like companies to have one company that makes its money primarily from them. So we've built our model such that we're very happy to charge fees to companies directly for selling them services that they find useful. And this is not this kind of weird indirect subsidies thing that the incumbents do.
And do you have a technology component to the exchange that's different from the others?
Yes, we are the very first stock exchange in America that has been built from scratch to be a stock exchange. We built all the software ourselves. People don't know this, but every other exchange, as I understand it, that has been approved was first a trading platform that was elevated into an exchange. So that's how you normally begin. We built this from scratch to be an exchange, to list companies. That's its purpose. And then we're a software company first and foremost. So we are able to use modern software techniques to a degree that none of the incumbents have been able to. Every part of it that can run in the cloud, it does, and a bunch of other good stuff about the technical architecture that I find very interesting and most people don't. But also, we decided that we wouldn't limit ourselves just to building the stock exchange. We actually built a whole software platform of tools and products and services that you can use even before you're public. So any of you have a cap table and you still keep it in Excel, please don't do that anymore. I can't tell you how many venture rounds I've seen over the years blown up because someone made an Excel math error on a convertible note or whatever, and now we use so many convertible notes, and just don't do that. Captable.io. If you have an stock option plan and you've told your board that you're going to hire a bunch of people with that stock option plan, you probably don't know whether you actually have enough options to do that hiring plan or not. So don't do that. Go to hiringplan.io. You probably get asked all the time how much runway you have left. If you just raised money, it's probably 18 months. I'm just guessing. So most people don't check very often to see how much runway they actually have left. They just say, well, I said it was 18 months. It's 3 months later, so it's probably 15 months. Don't do that. Go to startuprunway.io, have a sync with your bank account, actually check whether you have as much runway as you can. And I won't keep plugging we have 1,000,000,000 trillion of these tools that are all designed around specific problems that startups face, and they're all free. And we hope that one day you'll list with us, so we'd like to get to know you before that. So go check them out.
I have a few more questions. Can I do a time check? What time is it?
42.
Great.
Perfect.
So I have a few more questions on LTSE, but I wanted to open it up to the audience before I go on with mine. Aaron?
Describe the world a decade from now. What are the second order impacts of the success of LTSE?
Well, I sure hope,
If you're allowed to.
subject to regulatory approval.
Yes.
Here are the things that I hope will happen. I mean, the first and foremost thing is this next generation of companies has a very high percentage of companies that are actually genuinely purpose-driven. We make fun of the unicorns and whatever, but a lot of those companies have a very distinctive company culture. They are really trying to do something good for the world. If we just get through the next 10 years and that still exists, that would be an amazing accomplishment. Because I don't think plan A is absolutely 100% not going to get us there. Eventually, companies should start going public sooner again. There's tremendous problems being caused in Silicon Valley by companies being private too long. That's not a criticism. If I was in their shoes, I probably would do the same thing, because being public is so bad today that it makes sense to avoid it as long as possible. But that is a very antisocial thing. Amazon went public after 3 years. You imagine if you actually had the cojones to put Amazon in your retirement account when it went public and you just held it this whole time and did nothing else, like, right? Like the general public was given that opportunity and they're not anymore. Instead, we finance growth in Silicon Valley through a bunch of oligarchs and petrostate dollars and all kinds of stuff. And it's just like, that's a terrible policy outcome. And like, then we're like, why is there this tech backlash? People feel like they've been left out. It's like, because they have actually literally been locked out. We used to power people's retirement and now we don't. And we should not be happy about that. That's gonna be bad news. Then the second order effects are also a lot about sustainability. And I don't just mean that in an environmental sense, although obviously that's one of the major challenges facing the planet, but like a lot of the bad, you just see this like this, I'm not trying to avoid like a fantasy or sci-fi metaphor, but you have this like capital markets beating heart that is operating at this quarterly rhythm. And you have all these executives with these short-term stock options. And if you've ever like peek at the academic research on this, it is wild. If a company has like a 10% increase of the number of short-term shareholders on its cap table, you can predict with great rigor, statistically speaking, what will happen next. Guess what? The stock price will go up in the short term and down in the long term on a very defined schedule. Executive compensation will change in a very defined way. It will become more polarized, more inequality, greater rewards for the executives. And guess when the vesting schedule will be aligned with? You'll never guess. The executive will tend to vest their shares right at the peak of short-term value improvement, leaving everybody else to hold the bag of the decline. Like the idea that that's so clear, that like it's happening so dramatically that it shows up in like a statistical survey of companies in general, it means the actual phenomenon is quite powerful and bad. So we like think of the problems that's causing in politics and in the environment and in pick your favorite problem in the world. We got to fix that.
Alex?
So, like, it seems to me that you mentioned earlier a little bit about things like maybe like cancer treatment being areas where people state that maybe like lean startup is not a good application of, or
totally.
You shouldn't apply lean startup to that. I would also think a stock exchange intuitively would seem like a place where there might be a lot of like headwinds to doing lean startups. So can you talk a little bit about like to what extent you're able to apply?
That's one of my favorite things about this. First of all, I feel like this project has been by far the hardest thing I've ever tried to do, and like I could not have done it at any earlier time in my life. It would have killed me for sure. So like it kind of required like every skill, everything I've learned, and like a big part of it was like having a framework for analyzing these decisions so that I could put a plan together that I could keep going for such a long time is like really key. One of the things that was really challenging is, so in general, this is like a high degree of difficulty startup because it's super highly regulated. Also, it's very expensive. So you have to spend a lot of money ahead of time. Plus, you have the problem where it's kind of like the old semiconductor businesses the venture used to fund, where like you have the capital costs of building a manufacturing plant, but you also have like consumer risks of like the thing has to be very fashionable for people to use your chips at the end. So it's like a combination of high technical risk and customer risk like in the same business. People kind of forgotten how to fund those things. They're for a good reason, they're terrible. And so I was like, great, this is like to your question about the misconceptions about lean startup, like I'm gonna get to address a bunch of them all at once. Because I feel like it's very straightforward. It's like, okay, going fast means not going fast in some absolute sense, like fast as a dating app. It means going fast relative to the industry that you're in. So like people created like a new stock exchange like kind of once every 10 years, like it's usually how long it takes. So if we get it done in 3 years, that's way faster. Then like, okay, well what do we have to do? Like how do we change the scope of the problem to allow it to get to market faster? There's a lot of that kind of learning that we had to do. A lot of like customer testing, like what about this value prop? You know, you think about like making a Venn diagram. You know, anyone been in a two-sided market where you're like, okay, is there a Venn diagram between what the buyers want and what the sellers want? Hopefully there's some overlap and it's not headlights. Well, now it's just like this is like your everyday old 5-sided marketplace where you just have to find one value prop that works great for companies, VCs, the buy side, the sell side, and regulators at the same time. Like no problem. But like, it's not that big a problem. It just means you have to do like, n to the 5th number of conversations. But like, great, you have some extra conversations. Like it's not that bad. The other part that was really hard is I had to teach the team that the stuff that we were building, even the highly regulated stuff that we're building, was an experiment. I'll give you an example. We built this new exchange from scratch, but that was not our first attempt. We actually had this MVP that we tried to do earlier in partnership with an incumbent exchange that like blew up over political crazy stuff, and if I tell you the story, you'll think I'm a crazy conspiracy nut, but like that's just how Washington D.C. works right now. It's much worse than you think. So we built that to get to market sooner. So everyone's like, great, we need to build this thing to get to market as soon as possible. And it's like, that's correct. But it's not. The reason people are like, so therefore we got to be ready to serve our first customer, we got to build out all this infrastructure for what happens like post the thing being approved. It's like, no. We are going as fast as possible. We are trying to shorten our time to market, but why? Because we have to learn what it will take to get a company to yes in this highly differentiated, new, risky thing. That's the purpose. The learning is the purpose. So we have to design the experiment to learn the most, so that if it should fail, like for example, if we had a weirdo Washington D.C. based ambush that freaked us out, like we wouldn't view that as a failure. We would have built the plan from a financial plan point of view, from a fundraising and runway, where everything about the plan is designed to allow us to absorb that blow and continue. So I wish I wasn't right. You can't predict what the problem's going to be, but you know there's going to be a problem. So when that problem went down, it felt awful. We all thought the company was going to die, but actually, like when we really people were like, wait, actually, no, we're not going to die. We made a plan to encounter this potentiality. So that was a really important like MVP example, and I'm happy to talk more about it if people want. But it was like, to me, even I was like really stressed out about it. Like it was very hard for me to keep that detached view, to be like, yeah, the purpose of this was to learn what the problems were, so that we can come back stronger in the next iteration and the next iteration. And that means from a runway point of view, you have to be able to be alive to do that. And just like when you work backwards from what will be required for that to happen, it has really like concrete operational consequences that I think luckily we took into account. Otherwise we wouldn't be here now.
I have a lot of questions, but unfortunately I think Eric needs to go to his fundraising meeting, like all of us here do.
I can't be late, yeah.
And he can't be late, but thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, I appreciate it. It's really a pleasure. Where's Pavitra?
Yeah.
Pavitra works for me at LTSC and works on the tools I was talking about, so if you actually have questions about it, he knows what.
Maybe we can have you next.
Come on down, and you might want to we'll learn about cap table management, all the things that go wrong. Like Pavitra will be happy to educate you.
Great.
Please don't make these mistakes. I can't say, it's like, entrepreneurship is hard enough. Don't let the boneheaded stuff blow you up. That's my last parting words of wisdom. Thanks all very much.
Thank you.